Hello, Melanie Phillips. Good morning. How are you today?
Good morning, Abby. Very well. How are you?
Very well, thank God. And once again, the world is giving us headlines to talk about. Who knew?
Well, yes, our hope that one day we will find nothing to talk about because peace and harmony will have broken out. Unfortunately, another week's gone by. It hasn't happened.
I hear your British optimism in there. That's wonderful, Melanie.
I'm a little ray of sunshine, as you know.
All right, so let's go right into it. Let's start with Saudi Arabia. Again, more people have been coming out talking about the potential deal being worked about and Israel working with Saudi Arabia getting behind the deal. Dr. Moti Kedar out of Israel has actually said Israel should be careful about working any deals working with Saudi Arabia. What do you have to say about all of this development?
Well, first of all, I think that Dr. Mordechai Kadar is entirely correct that one has to be extremely careful. Um, that notwithstanding the fact that the new Crown Prince, the new Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, is a noted reformer and has made some very encouraging noises about Saudi Arabia turning away from Wahhabi Islam and so on. The fact is that Saudi Arabia is a very extreme place by any rational definition of the term. And we have yet to see quite what the reforms that are being promised by MBS, as he's called, Mohammed bin Sultan, the Crown Prince, what they're going to look like. I think that Dr. Kadar is correct to say that the overtures that MBS is making to Israel, to America, are quite clearly informed by Saudi self-interest in that Saudi has this fight to the death now with its mortal enemy Iran, in that insofar as it has that fight, it's making common cause with America and Israel, which also have this enemy in Iran, and consequently Saudi needs the support of both America and Israel to fight that battle adequately. Now, to what extent this means a proper shift in attitudes in Saudi Arabia is another matter. You know, one has to bear in mind that there are decades, if not centuries, of not just enmity against Israel, but going back before then, religiously based antipathy to Judaism and to Jews. In the Arab world, in the Muslim world, in Saudi Arabia in particular. So that can't be erased overnight, however reformist Prince Mohammed bin Salman might prove to be. Having said that, I think it's not insignificant, and one must bear in mind the sort of things that are being said in recent days, which would have been quite unthinkable even a short while ago. Apart from the fact that you have MBS himself, the Crown Prince himself, saying making reformist noises, you also have the remarkable ruling by the Grand Mufti of Saudi Arabia, which I think we've talked about in the past, which forbade war against the Jews in terms. And he said that fighting Israel was inappropriate for Islam. That was significant enough. But then another Saudi cleric has joined in, a man called Dr. Mohammed bin Abdul Karim Al Issa, who's the former Saudi justice minister, the former senior advisor to the Saudi king, and he's known to be close to MBS, to the reformist prince. He has said, as was reported in Israel's Ma'ariv newspaper, that, quote, any act of violence or terrorism that tries to hide behind religion has no justification whatsoever, not even in Israel. Now, that is a very significant statement. He is not the only one to be saying it. These are straws in the wind, maybe, and of course one has to bear in mind that none of these people will be saying this were it not for the fact that the Crown Prince's accession to power has changed the atmosphere completely. And in that kind of society, you do what the ruler says. And if the ruler says you've got to make reformist noises towards Israel and the Jews, that's what you do. The question is whether the Saudi street will go along with this, whether the Arab street will go along with it. And I would say not for many decades hence, if ever. But nevertheless, it is significant. One shouldn't ignore it. And then the further factor to be considered, again, we have no answer to this at the moment, is bearing in mind all this reformist stuff that's coming out from the Crown Prince. Where does that leave his attitude towards the Palestinians? Now, we know, those of us in our camp, we know that the Palestinian cause has never been dear to the hearts of any Arab leader. It's been a useful tool by which they can divert the otherwise certain rage which would come to them from their own oppressed people. It's diverted that rage towards the external enemy of the Jews. And it's to that extent the Palestinians have always been a tool in that wider cause of self-interest in the Arab world. Now you have the Crown Prince coming along, and he's very focused on two things: on defeating Iran and on securing Saudi Arabia's future, because he has understood that unless Saudi Arabia reforms, it's nothing. Now, I may be wrong, but I'm told by people who know and follow this very closely and know a great deal more about it than I do, that he's just not interested in the Palestinians. He is not going to allow the Palestinian issue to get in the way of his agenda. He doesn't care about them. And insofar as it's a thing, it's a failed thing. It belongs to history. It belongs to the failure of history. And why should he bother? So he's not going to put himself behind their cause at all. So this leaves open to question how he's going to behave in respect of them when it comes to what we're told is a new peace plan coming out of the American Trump administration. We have no idea what that is, whether it is something or what at the moment. We are in the dark. But I would guess from the kind of noises that the Palestinians are making, that they understand that their ally in the Arab world, the Sunni Arab world, has now all but disappeared. That they can no longer look to the Sunni Arab world, led by Saudi Arabia, for any kind of muscular support at all. They're being cut loose. They're being cut loose. The Arab world doesn't care about them anymore. So what are the Palestinians going to do? Well, I would guess they're going to play their last card, which is their best card, and has always been their best card, which is that their true ally against Israel is the West. And I would guess that their tactic may well be that if they are blocked from doing the kind of things that they were doing in the diplomatic field because of Saudi Arabia not being interested, because of the Trump administration being quite hostile, they can't manipulate the UN in the way that they were trying to do, then they're going to resort to the tactic that they've tried and tested and has never failed them in the past, to ramp up the violence against Israelis, to provoke the Israelis into a reaction which will call down upon the Israelis' head the opprobrium of the Western world and turn Israel back into the centerpiece of the world's attention in the Middle East, which for the last few years has been directed at Syria, to turn it back onto Israel and to turn Israel again into the pariah of the world. That, I would guess, would be their tactic. It's failed over and over again. Palestinians, as we know, never lose an opportunity to repeat their failures. They never learn from history, because ultimately they will not understand the game is up. The game is up, and that they have no option but to either learn to live alongside Israel, learn to accept Israel's legitimacy as a Jewish homeland, and then they will have a reasonable future, however that's organized on the ground, or they will condemn themselves to fight interminably, lose many more of their own people, and dig themselves further into the hole in which they clambered so many years ago.
Wow. There is a lot to what you're saying, because they have to use that strategy. I mean, anyone who seriously looks at the consecutive peace deals that have been put on the table, that each time after Arafat or Abbas said no, then they started terror attacks. But correct me if I'm wrong. What were you saying?
I just said that's absolutely correct.
Right. So that history, right? So your history analysis of what could be now that they're being dumped by the Saudi Arabia, it sounds spot on. Can the potential difference now be, for the first time, because a Trump administration is much more pro-Israel than any other U.S. administration until now, since Oslo started in 1993, and they're thinking out of the box, and they're trying to do the best deal if and when the Mahmoud Abbas does start a terror campaign against Israel, but yet not have the U.S. back, and therefore come out with a different outcome than every other time that they've used terror and gotten the West to be against us. Is there something to what I'm saying?
Well, there's something, but we don't know quite what that something is, because the signals to me coming out of the Trump administration are unfortunately rather ambiguous. I believe that President Trump himself is wholly committed to the state of Israel and its security and its future, emotionally and in every other sense. But as we've said so often in the past, President Trump thinks out of his gut, and his brain doesn't necessarily follow. He doesn't necessarily think things through from first principles to get the full picture. And more worryingly than that, he is surrounded by people in his administration who are either people of the what I would call the discredited realist school, who think that, you basically got to crack heads together in the Middle East and get them to sit down together, which is wrong, because if you have an agenda of extermination by one side, you don't try and make compromises with that side. That's, in my view, surrender. And that's been the problem that the West's had since before Israel was created. They've tried to make an accommodation with people whose agenda should not and cannot be accommodated. And the other thing that worries me is that the people who are, of the three Jewish people who are closest to the president, Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, in whom we understand the president places enormous trust, and who seems to be leading the attempt to broker a peace deal with the Palestinians. Then there's the Ambassador Friedman, and there's the envoy, Jason Greenblatt. Now, with the exception of Ambassador Friedman, who I think has fairly hawkish views, both Jared Kushner and Mr. Greenblatt seem to me to come from the part of American Jewish society which is supportive of Israel, emotionally supportive, but nevertheless has a wrong-headed view about how to arrive at a proper, just solution to the impasse, because it believes that basically it's a matter of accommodating the Palestinians to a greater or lesser degree. And I believe that is fundamentally wrong, not because I have anything against the Palestinians. I would hope that they would live alongside Israel in peace and harmony and be a great trading people with the Jews of Israel, to the benefit of both. That would be wonderful if that would happen. But we know it's not going to happen, because we know that that's not their agenda at all. Their agenda is the extermination of Israel. And it is, it is a very great tragedy that so many very, very, not just well-meaning Jews, but Jews who are emotionally very committed to the state of Israel, don't get this. For various reasons, they can't bring themselves to see this as a war of extermination, which Israel has to fight off. Because if they did, then they would realize that there can be no accommodation made with that agenda. And that if you make an accommodation with people who wish to exterminate, you are basically, to some extent, or to a greater or lesser extent, giving a signal of surrender and incitement to greater violence. And so it's a great, great tragedy that so many Jews who are committed to Israel really don't get that. And that's what worries me, that Mr. Trump is surrounded by these people who are giving him, in their different ways, the wrong kind of signal, and in an attempt to accommodate them because they're part of his team, his own instincts, which are to support Israel, are going to be diluted to the point where they become incoherent. And that's very dangerous, very, very dangerous for Israel indeed, because then Israel can be caught in a kind of pincer movement in which it's left once again just to survive on its own wit and its own strength and its own ability just to outwit everybody else. That's a very lonely place to be, and that's where Israel's been many times in the past, and I would hope it's not going to be so again. So all one can say is the signals now are very confused and confusing. There's a lot of optimism, I think, in the changes that we're seeing in the Arab and Muslim world. But it's complicated, and one has to be very cautious, and nothing can be taken for granted, and we have to take this one step at a time and just assess everything insofar as information arrives before us, which we can evaluate as being reliable.
Wow. So that, I mean, for someone like me, it's sad to hear that even with Trump and his positioning for Israel, what you're saying is if the Palestinian Authority once again supports a terror campaign, we will still be looked at as, pointed as the bad guy, and possibly diplomatic machinations put into effect with the whole focus and blame and pressure on us and not on the true bad guys, which is the Palestinian Authority and the terror that they'd be supporting against us.
It could be. We don't know. And let's hope that's not put to the test. Let's really hope that's not put to the test. Israel certainly doesn't want to put it to the test. Israel will go to enormous lengths to avoid military engagement on a serious scale for all kinds of reasons. But if it were to be put to the test, well, I wouldn't like to predict how the Trump administration would react.
Got it. All right, I'm going to jump into a different issue. You already touched upon it in your last answer. You brought up American Jewry and their connection, sort of support for Israel, but yet not understanding Israel's predicament. And just last week, we had a whole citizen diplomatic row where American Jewry were up in arms against an interview that the Deputy Foreign Minister, Tzipi Hotobelli, gave. And I know you wrote about that. So can you give us some of your insight to what just happened there?
Yes, I don't think I wrote about it, actually. I wrote about Tzipi Hotobelli a couple of weeks ago, where I had very harsh things to say about her. I wrote in the Jerusalem Post a couple of weeks ago. She appeared on a BBC radio interview and was absolutely hopeless, showing that she didn't really understand where the British/Western attack on Israel was really coming from, and gave a hopelessly inadequate set of answers. And I was dismayed by that, and I had very, very harsh words indeed to say about her. And now we find that Tzipi Hotobelli is in...
Also, forgive me, Melanie, before you continue, I was thinking about I think it was your latest article, worried about Jew baiters, give it straight back to them, which I was tying that in because I know many American Jews are also upset about that because it's tied directly to the Tzipi Hotobelli issue from last week, if I'm not mistaken.
I see, yes. I didn't realize you were relating it to that article. Yes, I wrote in that article that I believe that there is so much dismay about the great tide of anti-Israel and increasingly overt anti-Jewish feeling that's been coming out, particularly in Britain, but also in the United States. And that the dismay over that great tide of bigotry is matched, if not outweighed, by the great concern that the attempts to stem it by the Jewish world are not succeeding, patently not succeeding. What I was saying in that article was that it's not surprising they're not succeeding because they're all going at it in the wrong way. They're all basically starting a position of defense. Basically, it's why are you being so horrible about Israel when Israel is actually the victim in the Middle East, when Israel does all these wonderful things towards Arabs, so it has these wonderful humanitarian gestures towards Syria, towards Palestinians. It's got the most moral army in the world. It has the right to be in the land and all kind of stuff. Which is all fine, it's all completely true, but it's beside the point, because the point being that if you start defending yourself on territory defined by your enemies, you are halfway towards ceding the ground, or ceding the point to those enemies. And instead of defending, we should be attacking. We should be attacking them, we should be calling them out for their own racism, for example, in backing ethnic cleansing. What else are they doing when they say there cannot be a state of Palestine with the settlers there? They're saying the Western people who support the Palestinians are saying that there can be no state of Palestine with any Jews in it. That is racist. That is ethnic cleansing. Israel is 20% Arab. Why can't a state of Palestine be 20% Jewish? No reason whatsoever. But of course, they don't think like that. They're just parroting the propaganda they have learned from the Arab and Muslim world, which is indeed deeply, deeply racist and anti-Jew. So that was the kind of thing I was saying in my article, that the defenders of Israel have to change from their position of defense to one of attack. They have to go from the back foot onto the front foot. Otherwise, they cannot begin to make any inroads into this terrible thing that we and they and Israel and the Jewish people are facing. When it comes to Tzipi Hotobelli, however, she got into terrible hot water with Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu, because she said, or rather was quoted as saying, that the American Jews had no business criticizing Israel because their children weren't sent into the army to die for their country. Now, that sounds terrible. And she was hauled over the coals and may even lose her job. She may even, I don't know, maybe even by the time I'm talking to you, she may have lost her job. Mr. Netanyahu has taken the dimmest possible view because she has insulted the American Jewish community who are in high dudgeon. But I watched that interview. And I have to say, notwithstanding my concerns about how she performed in Britain, I think she has had a raw deal here because she was taken out of context by the way she was reported. She was talking about the American Jews. She was talking about the very troubling phenomenon in which American Jews are losing support for Israel, and they're turning increasingly hostile towards Israel. And she was facing some fairly hostile questioning from American anchors who were saying to her, well, look, if Israel wasn't behaving so badly, for example, in what it's doing at the Western Wall in preventing egalitarian prayer, then, if it's behaving as badly as that, then it's not surprising that American Jews are losing it. I think that it was in response to that kind of questioning that what Tzipi Hatovely was saying was a number of certainly very aggressive things about American Jews, but amongst which she said American Jews don't understand because their children aren't sent to fight and die for their country. They don't understand what we're living through. In other words, the thing that got her into such water was where she was trying to say, look, American Jews, because they're living in peace and tranquility in America, they just don't get how we have to live in Israel. They don't understand what it's like to have children who are sent to die for their country in the way that we do. Now, this has caused great offense because, first of all, there are American Jews whose children do serve in the American military. There are American Jews whose children come and serve in the IDF. There are links, but by and large, she was making, I think, a point which is unexceptionably true, that diaspora Jews have it easy. And diaspora Jews really do not understand fully what it's like to bring up a child for 17 years and then watch him go to some godforsaken hellhole where he may have to lose his life or come back gravely injured as a matter of routine. They don't understand what it's like to live in that kind of society where that spectre is hanging over the heads of every family with children. And I think that's a very, very reasonable point to make to any diaspora Jew who criticizes Israel. It's something that should bring every diaspora Jew up short. You're criticizing from a position of safety. So, just bear that in mind. That's what she was trying to say. It came out in a very aggressive kind of way. And I suppose if you're the Prime Minister of Israel, faced with an undiplomatic remark or set of remarks by someone who's supposed to be a diplomat, that's not the way diplomats are supposed to behave. I have to say I take a different kind of view. I think that America is that Israel is far too timid about the way in which it views the world in general, and too timid about the way in which it views the Jews. Israel has always sucked up to and soft-soaked the American Jewish community, because it believes it to be wealthy and powerful and to put its wealth and power behind the cause of Israel. Great. Many American Jews do that with great effect, and that's terrific they do that. And there are still many who do that. But overall, they aren't stopping doing that. Overall, they're turning indifferent to hostile. So overall, you could say that Israel, by playing by the diplomatic rules of the game, by not being rude about the people who support you, are actually failing. They're failing to tell them the truth. And I do believe, I'm not a diplomat, and that's why I'm not a diplomat. I'm a journalist. I actually believe in telling people the truth. And I believe Israel should be telling American Jews the truth. Not that their children don't serve in the army. That's a kind of minor point. That's not really the point at all. The point is, they should be saying to the American Jews, you're losing your connection to us because you're losing your connection to Judaism. And you are taking refuge in a kind of sentimentalized view of us, which has no relation to the truth. And hardly any of you ever come here anyway. We're very grateful that so many of you do come here, but relatively speaking, most of you don't, and most of you don't care. And Israel should be saying this to them, should be calling them out, because a lot of American Jews take refuge in their minds in some sort of cozy fiction that they're all so, so supportive of Israel, and Israel has some sort of obligation to be grateful. Well, no, American Jews are turning against Israel increasingly, and that is that should be a source of very great alarm. And to that extent, I think Tzipi Hotovely, her phraseology could have been better, but she was not wrong and should not have been called out like she was.
No, I'm very, very glad to hear your insight on that. That's very much how I've been thinking as well. Again, what she said, she could have said better and not cause the headlines. And my thinking is because of the other issues that have come up with diaspora Jewry and because of coalition politics, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had to make the decisions that angered diaspora Jewry. Here, she's disposable. She's a disposable politician that if he has to get rid of, she could be the fig leaf in order to cover for all the other issues that diaspora Jewry is up in arms about. But your ultimate point, I think, is an important one, where the blame actually leads to them disconnecting from Israel and lowering their support from Israel as the voices grow within Israelis who don't get it, but American Jewry putting the blame on Israel, unfortunately.
Well, I think, Israel has always taken the view that it doesn't spit in the eye of its allies, and you can understand that up to a point. And, it's an iron rule of diplomacy, isn't it, that you're sort of nice to people all the time. And you suck up to them in order to get them on side. But as I say, I'm not a diplomat and never will be, possibly for this reason, that I don't believe in that. I mean, I believe in actually, that diplomats from time to time, they have to actually tell people, including their allies, unpleasant truths in order to hold those people's feet to the fire. There's no point having an ally who is not really an ally at all, who is a kind of pretend ally, or an ally who's, losing their warmth of their feeling towards you and turning into something else. There's no point in sucking up to those sorts of people. You've got to actually tell them something's going wrong here. And unless you do that, you're not really doing your own country, it seems to me, any service. It's often been said, it's a sort of saying that, a diplomat is somebody who's sent abroad to lie for his country. But what we're talking about is a diplomat sent abroad to lie to others about themselves on account of their support for his country. And that, I think, is really a step too far.
I hear you. Well, Melanie, thank you so much for your insight this week, and keep on writing what you're writing. Everyone should visit melaniephillips.com, sign up for Melanie's newsletter on the website to continue getting this very important insight. Thank you so much, Melanie.
Thank you, Avi, as ever, and thank you to all of you for watching and listening.
Take care. Shalom.